A chimney. A sealed, capped chimney on an abandoned cabin 2 blocks from his father's house. Nobody had opened it in years. Joshua Maddux was 18 years old. By every account, he was easygoing, funny, a little directionless. The kind of kid who'd tell his dad he was going for a walk and come back an hour later with a story. On May 8, 2008, he told his dad exactly that. He went for a walk. He did not come back. Woodland Park, Colorado is a small mountain town, the kind of place where an 18-year-old disappearing draws real attention. Search parties went out. Tips came in. Months passed. Then years. Joshua's face appeared on missing persons sites and stayed there, one of thousands of faces that never come down. 7 years later, in August 2015, a crew arrived to demolish a vacant cabin 2 blocks from the Maddux house. The owner had rented it out a decade earlier, then abandoned it. He'd checked in occasionally. He'd noticed a smell once, figured it was dead rats. A piece of furniture blocked the fireplace, so he hadn't thought much about the chimney. The demolition crew thought about the chimney. They found Joshua inside it, mummified, wedged 15 feet down in a sealed flue. The coroner ruled it accidental. The working theory: Joshua climbed to the roof, tried to shimmy down the chimney to get inside, maybe on a dare, maybe just because teenagers sometimes do inexplicable things, and got stuck. A tragic accident with a sad, simple explanation. Here is the problem with that theory. The cap was on the outside. The chimney had a metal cap fitted on top from the exterior, the kind you need to physically remove before climbing in. It was still in place when the demolition crew found him. There is more. Some of Joshua's clothing turned up inside the cabin, but Joshua himself was in the chimney, wearing only a thermal shirt. His jeans, his other layers, inside a building he never physically entered. 3 explanations have been put forward. He went in voluntarily, and the cap somehow reseated itself. Someone put him there after he was already dead, or he was placed there alive, in a space too narrow to escape from, and the cap was replaced from the outside. The coroner found no evidence of trauma, no drugs, no signs of foul play. The ruling stayed accidental. His family has never accepted it. The cabin was demolished. The chimney came down with it. Whatever it knew is concrete rubble now. He went for a walk, 2 blocks from home, and every explanation for what happened next falls apart before it reaches the end. It is 2008. A man is driving to the hospital. His daughter is being born. His name was Mateusz. He lived in Poland, in a small town, and by all accounts, he was an ordinary man doing an ordinary thing, getting in his car and driving to meet his child. He called ahead. He was on his way. And then, somewhere between his front door and the maternity ward, Mateusz disappeared. His car turned up abandoned. No sign of a struggle, no note, no witnesses who could explain how a man driving to his daughter's birth ends up leaving his car on the side of a road and vanishing into the air. His family searched. Police investigated. The baby arrived in the world without her father there. Then they found him. His body was discovered near the family home, not far from the place where he started that drive, the drive to the hospital, the ordinary drive on an ordinary day. He had been decapitated. There are almost no English language sources for this case. What we know comes from a single Reddit post, from someone who heard the story locally and felt compelled to write it down so that someone, somewhere, would know it happened. The poster apologised for the lack of sources. They said the case had stayed with them because of how cynical it felt. That word, cynical, stayed with everyone who read it. Think about what this case contains. A man with no apparent enemies, no documented disputes, no history that would explain any of it. A drive of a few minutes, a baby being born at the end of it, and someone who interrupted that drive so completely that he never arrived, never came home, and was found decapitated close to where he started. No suspect was ever publicly named. No motive was ever established. The case did not cross language barriers into the English-speaking world, and so it sits in a kind of double obscurity, unknown outside Poland and barely spoken of within it. The theories people offer when they hear this story tend to collapse quickly. Random violence on that road, at that time, in that direction, with no other incidents. A targeted killing of a man with no known enemies. Something connected to the birth itself, to the family, to a secret nobody has surfaced. None of them hold weight. None of them close the gap between a man getting into his car and a body found near his house. His daughter is a teenager now. She has her father's name on a missing persons report and a grave with no explanation above it. Imagine you're 16. You go to a party. You smoke weed. And then something goes very, very wrong. Karlie Gusé was a popular high school sophomore in Chalfant Valley, California, a small community in the high desert east of the Sierra Nevada. In August 2018, she attended a party. By most accounts, she smoked marijuana. Somewhere in the hours that followed, she became convinced she was dying. Her stepmother, Melissa Gusé, picked her up around 1 in the morning. Witnesses at the party described Karlie as terrified, trembling, staring, saying strange things. In the car, she told Melissa she couldn't feel her legs. She was staring at her hands like she didn't recognize them. She said she thought she was going to die. Melissa drove her home. Karlie stumbled inside. And then Melissa went back to sleep. That decision, going back to sleep while a visibly terrified teenager sat alone, is the part of this story that has never stopped pulling at people. Melissa later said she believed Karlie was just having a bad reaction and needed to sleep it off. She said she checked on her. She said Karlie seemed calmer. Sometime before dawn, Karlie walked out the front door into the high desert and was never seen again. When Melissa realized Karlie was gone, she raised the alarm. Extensive searches of the desert terrain found nothing. No clothing, no footprints beyond the immediate area, no trace. The drug reaction theory has always struggled. Cannabis, even very strong cannabis, even in a teenager, does not typically produce terror, hallucinations, or an episode severe enough that a person disappears into a dark desert and never surfaces. Some investigators have suggested another substance was in what Karlie smoked. Others have suggested the reaction was the result of a spiked drink earlier in the evening. Melissa passed a polygraph test. She has also given accounts of that night that shifted in small ways across different tellings. The timeline, what Karlie said, whether she got up and checked on her once or multiple times. Karlie's biological mother has never believed the official narrative. She has publicly and consistently pointed toward the stepmother. No charges have ever been filed. No body has ever been recovered. No explanation has closed the gap between a teenager sitting terrified on a couch and a desert that swallowed her whole. The high desert east of the Sierras is vast. In August, the nights are cold. Whatever happened to Karlie Gusé happened in the dark, and it has stayed there. What happens when a government decides not to look? Beginning around 2013 and accelerating through 2021, something started happening to people in New Brunswick, Canada. Patients, some teenagers, some in their 20s, some middle-aged, began presenting with symptoms that fit no known diagnosis. Rapid cognitive decline, visual hallucinations, involuntary muscle movements, a deterioration so swift that the doctors watching it described it as unlike anything in their experience. The Provincial Health Authority identified an official cluster. They acknowledged it. They said numbers were manageable, the situation under investigation. What they did not say, what a Guardian investigation later revealed, was that the unofficial count, the one being quietly tracked by individual physicians, was closer to 150 people, and that in some cases, the illness appeared to be spreading between people who lived together. Federal scientists had formally requested access to brain tissue from deceased patients. They wanted to test for BMAA, a neurotoxin produced by blue-green algae that accumulates in shellfish, particularly lobsters, which is a cornerstone of New Brunswick's economy. The provincial government blocked the testing. No explanation was given that satisfied anyone outside the government. What was already documented was striking enough. In at least 9 cases, a person developed the same cascading neurological symptoms after sustained close contact with a patient they were caring for. That is, a caregiver-to-patient pattern. In an illness officially attributed to environmental exposure, to a place, a substance, something you consumed, a caregiver transmission pattern is not supposed to appear. No confirmed cause has been established. The BMAA hypothesis remains untested where it matters most. Other explanations, pesticide contamination, industrial runoff, a prion-like process unlike anything catalogued, have each been raised and left to sit. Families have gone to journalists because the official channels have produced nothing they can hold on to. The cluster is still open. Cases are still being reported. Some of the earliest patients have died. Others continue to decline. There is a specific kind of dread that comes from watching an institution decide a mystery is too inconvenient to resolve, not because the answer is unreachable, but because reaching it would cost something. That dread is at the centre of New Brunswick, not just what is happening to people's minds, the decision, made by people in offices, not to find out why. He was 85 years old. He was sharp, healthy, and had never once gotten lost in his life. 0.5. He did not come home from the airport. Fermín Delgado Pinto was born in Peru in 1933. He spent his life working the land near the coast, fishing, taking long walks alone, sometimes for hours, and always finding his way back. When his daughters moved to Santiago, Chile, he followed them. He loved his family above everything else. His children described a man who was mentally clear, physically independent, on no medications, showing no signs of cognitive decline. He was 85, and he moved through the world with ease. In March 2018, one of his daughters was travelling back to Lima for her 25th wedding anniversary. Fermín, who hadn't been home to Peru in years, insisted on going too. The family bought tickets. On the return flight, due to timing, Fermín would have to travel back to Santiago alone, arriving before his daughter. The family had reservations. The airline, LATAM, reassured them. For a small fee, actually at no extra charge, a staff member would meet Fermín at the gate in Lima, assist him through the airport, and make sure he boarded his connection to Santiago. The family accepted this. They said goodbye in Lima. Fermín's daughter flew on her separate flight. Latam confirmed that Fermín boarded his return flight. The plane landed in Santiago. Fermín was not on it. The airline's records showed him boarding. At some point during that flight, a commercial LATAM Airlines jet, with crew, with other passengers, with everything a modern aircraft has, Fermín Delgado Pinto ceased to be aboard. No one reported seeing anything. No one raised an alarm mid-flight. He did not disembark at any intermediate stop, because there were none. He did not turn up in any hospital, any police record, any shelter. He has not been found. The theories are what you'd expect, and none of them hold cleanly. A medical episode, but no body found on the plane or at the airport. A disorientation that led him somewhere, but he was seen boarding. A deliberate disappearance, but no evidence and no reason, and a man who by every account loved his family without complication. He was 85. He boarded a plane. The plane landed. He was not on it. Nobody has explained what happened in between. Freshly made sandwiches in the fridge. His wife and daughter had left for the weekend. He was home alone in Amarillo, Texas. Sex, 0.5. That same weekend, 1,500 miles away in Washington state, a man was struck and killed by a hit-and-run driver on a highway and left as an unidentified John Doe. It took 17 years to connect those two facts. David Glenn Lewis was everything a small Texas city admires. He had a law degree from Texas Tech. He practiced as an attorney in Amarillo, ran Sunday school at his church, volunteered with the Boy Scouts, served on a community education board. He was, by all accounts, a devoted husband, a dedicated father, a man whose life was arranged around service and stability. Super Bowl weekend, January 1993. His wife Karen and their young daughter drove to Dallas for a shopping trip, a 400-mile journey they'd planned in advance. David stayed home. He made sandwiches, and then, at some point that weekend, he left. He did not tell anyone he was leaving. He left no note. He took no apparent luggage. His car was gone, but his law practice was in perfect order. No unfinished business, no pending crisis, no signal of any kind that something was wrong. Karen and their daughter returned to find the sandwiches still in the fridge. David was not there. He was never there again. The hit-and-run John Doe in Washington was catalogued, investigated, and filed unsolved. Washington state was thorough. They kept the case open. In 2010, advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to run the John Doe's profile against databases that hadn't existed before. The match came back. David Glenn Lewis, Amarillo, Texas, missing since January 1993. He had died within days of leaving home. Struck on a Washington highway, hundreds of miles from anyone who knew his name. What nobody has ever been able to establish is why. There were no plane tickets, no hotel records, no documented connections to Washington state, no secret life that investigators could uncover, no financial ruin, no affair, no crisis. Karen Lewis consistently described a husband with no reason to run. The sandwiches are the detail that stays with people. You make sandwiches when you're coming back. You make sandwiches for yourself for the week ahead for ordinary life. And then you drive to the other side of the country and you die on a highway. And you take the reason with you. It is September 11th, 1990. A Boeing 727 lifts off from Gander, Newfoundland, bound for Miami. It never arrives. No distress call, no wreckage, no bodies. The North Atlantic gives nothing back. The plane was registered OB1303, owned by a Peruvian airline called Faucett. It had spent the summer leased to Air Malta, flying holiday routes around Europe. The summer contract ended in September. The plane needed to go home to Lima. A Boeing 727 cannot cross the Atlantic in one leg. Its fuel capacity will not allow it. So the return journey required refueling stops. London, then Reykjavik, then Gander, then Miami, and finally on to Peru. The crew picked up in Gander were a mix of Faucett personnel who had been working in Europe, some of them reportedly travelling with family members. The exact number of people aboard has never been definitively established. The airlines said 15 departed Gander. Aviation safety databases list 16. The original flight manifest showed 18. Nobody agrees on a number, which means nobody is entirely certain how many people vanished that afternoon. The aircraft left Gander at 1:16 in the afternoon. It filed a standard flight plan. It flew out over the Atlantic into the kind of weather that is unremarkable for that stretch of ocean in September. Not ideal, but nothing a commercial aircraft cannot handle. At some point, it stopped transmitting. No mayday, no emergency squawk on the radio, no deviation from the flight path that anyone caught in real time. The plane simply stopped being a plane and became an absence over open water. A massive search operation covered the relevant corridor of ocean. American and Canadian authorities participated. They searched for days. They found nothing. Not a seat cushion, not a section of fuselage, not a smear of aviation fuel on the surface. The Atlantic offered no evidence at all that the plane had ever been there. The most straightforward explanation is that something catastrophic happened at altitude. Structural failure, explosive decompression, an event so sudden and total that no distress signal could precede it, and the aircraft fell into deep water and disintegrated. That explanation is probably correct. It just does not account for the families who received nothing to bury, or the contradictory head counts that mean the full list of the dead has never been confirmed, or the simple, irreducible fact that an ocean which usually gives back at least something gave back nothing at all. Before MH370 disappeared into the Indian Ocean, before MH17 was shot down over Ukraine, Malaysia Airlines lost a plane in a way that nobody has ever fully explained. The year was 1977. The hijacker was never identified. 100 people died, and nobody knows why. Malaysian Airlines System Flight 653 was a routine domestic hop, a Boeing 737 on a 40-minute run from Penang to Kuala Lumpur on December 4, 1977. 93 passengers, 7 crew, a flight so short that the aircraft barely reaches cruise altitude before it starts descending again. It was the kind of flight people took without thinking about it. Somewhere shortly after reaching altitude, a hijacking began. The cockpit voice recorder captured the first announcement. A voice told the crew the plane was under his control. The crew responded with compliance. Standard procedure for the time: do not escalate, do not resist. The voice did not state demands. It did not name a destination. It did not issue any conditions. It announced itself and then, largely, went quiet. The plane did not divert to Singapore as air traffic control later believed it might. It did not land anywhere. It began a descent, controlled, deliberate, and crashed into terrain at Tanjung Kupang in the state of Johor, killing everyone aboard. The final report on the incident was suppressed by the Malaysian government. It stayed suppressed for 42 years, until 2019, when a Malaysian blogger found a copy in a library in Singapore and published it. The cockpit voice recording was appended. What investigators heard on that recording was silence where demands should have been. No negotiation, no manifesto, no explanation for why a person would take control of an aircraft and fly it into the ground without saying anything. 3 categories of suspect have been put forward over the years. A politically motivated extremist with a target in Kuala Lumpur and a plan that somehow went wrong. A suicidal passenger who found a way into the cockpit. A crew member, the final officer, who initiated the crash deliberately. Each theory has a piece that does not fit. Each theory leaves the voice on the recording unidentified. 100 people died because someone made a decision in that cockpit. The decision has no name attached to it. 47 years later, it still does not. They went out to gather Christmas decorations. They never came home. And for 66 years, nobody thought to look in the river. December 7th, 1958. Kenneth and Barbara Martin loaded their 3 daughters into their car and drove to the Columbia River Gorge in Oregon, a spectacular stretch of canyon carved by glacial floods, a place families went for day trips. Barbara was 14, Virginia was 13, Susan was 11. The plan was to collect greenery for Christmas. Evergreen boughs, maybe some pine cones. The kind of errand that takes an afternoon and ends with dinner. The Martin family did not come home. The following year, the bodies of Virginia and Susan, the 2 youngest daughters, surfaced in the Columbia River. That told investigators something terrible had happened near the water, but the car was not found. Kenneth, Barbara, and their eldest daughter Barbara were not found. The search could not locate what the river was keeping. The case sat open. It sat open for 66 years. In 2024, a recreational diver named Archer Mayo became interested in the Martins. He was local. He lived near the gorge, had heard the story, felt the pull of it, the way people who live near long, unsolved things sometimes do. He studied historic photographs of Cascade Locks taken during its construction in the 1890s. In one photograph, he noticed something. A depression in the riverbed, a pit, in a location where a vehicle driving off the road in December 1958 might plausibly have ended up, he told police. They investigated. A partial vehicle was recovered, consistent with the Martins' car. That was not enough for Mayo. He continued diving. He made multiple dives a day, and eventually he brought up human remains, clothing, and a camera case. A battered camera case with Kenneth Martin's name and address still legible on it. Kenneth had labelled it in the ordinary way people label things they want returned if lost. He could not have imagined where it would end up, or how long it would take someone to find it. 66 years is a long time to lie in a cold river. The Martins went for Christmas greenery on a December afternoon and drove into the Columbia. And for 2/3 of a century, the gorge held them, while the world above went on without them. The camera is the part people cannot shake. His name, his address, still there. A woman walks down a highway in blood-soaked clothes, carrying her dead child. That is the last confirmed image of Frances Sessions. After that, she disappears entirely. May 20th, 1946. Frances, her 6-year-old son, and her nephew took a hike east of her father's farm in Ogden, Utah, up toward Bear Cave in the rocky terrain above the city. In the afternoon, the 2 boys lost their footing on the steep slope and fell over a rocky ledge. Frances's nephew was injured. Frances's son was killed. What Frances did next is the documented part of the story. She gathered her dead child and carried him half a mile through rough terrain back to her father's farmhouse. Her injured nephew walked with her. When they arrived, Frances went inside, walked to the bathroom, and washed her face and her hands. Then she left. She walked out of the farmhouse still wearing the blood-soaked clothing. She did not tell anyone where she was going. At around 4:30 in the afternoon, 2 employees of Utah Power and Light saw a woman matching her description walking south on the highway toward Weber Canyon. That is the last known sighting of Frances Sessions. The investigation that followed was serious. Police pursued leads across the United States for months. Nothing surfaced. Frances was listed as a missing person and has remained one ever since. The case is still open on the Utah Bureau of Criminal Investigation's cold case files. 2 questions have circled this story for 80 years. The first is what killed the boy? He fell from a rocky ledge, and the fall is the official explanation, but the cause of death was never conclusively established by a medical examiner in a way that fully closed the case. The second is why Frances left. She had just carried her dead son half a mile. She had just delivered her injured nephew to safety, and then she cleaned herself up and walked into the highway and kept walking. Grief does strange things to people. Shock does stranger things. Those are real explanations, and they may be true, but they exist alongside the fact that Frances Sessions has never been found, and the boy's death was never formally resolved, and the 2 mysteries are joined at the hip. One hillside, one afternoon, 2 questions that have no answer. It is July 4th, 1928. Alfred Loewenstein is the 3rd richest man in the world. He is flying over the English Channel in his private aircraft. He walks to the back of the plane and is never seen alive again. Loewenstein was a Belgian financier who had made one of the great fortunes of the early 20th century, somewhere in the range of £12 million sterling, built on investments in electric power and artificial silk, at the exact moment those industries were becoming the infrastructure of modern life. He was 61, imperious, powerful, the kind of man whose name appeared on front pages and whose phone calls changed things. On that July afternoon, he boarded his Fokker trimotor at Croydon Airport outside London, bound for Brussels. The aircraft carried a small group: his secretary, a couple of male attendants, 2 female typists, and the flight crew. The cabin was compact. It was not possible to move through it without being noticed. Somewhere over the channel, Loewenstein stood up, walked toward the rear of the aircraft, and opened a door. The door he opened was the external door, the one that leads to the outside of a plane flying at several thousand feet. The aircraft had a lavatory at the rear, accessed through a different door with different hardware. The external door required deliberate action to open. It did not open accidentally. The plane landed in Brussels. Loewenstein was not aboard. His body was recovered from the Channel several weeks later. The cause of death was listed as drowning. A brief inquest was held. No further investigation was conducted. 3 explanations have circulated ever since. Accident. He confused the external door with the lavatory door in a moment of disorientation. Suicide. His financial empire, though vast, was showing structural weaknesses, and those closest to him may have known what the public did not. Murder. Loewenstein had spent decades accumulating enemies among the powerful, and a small enclosed aircraft over the open ocean was a place where an inconvenient man might be made to disappear. What undermines the accident theory is the door. The handles were different. The location was different. The external door opened inward and required force. What undermines the murder theory is the number of witnesses who saw nothing. What underlies all of it is the fact that the inquest lasted a day. No one with a motive was ever questioned, and the case was closed with the same speed that powerful men's affairs tend to be settled when there is money enough to make questions go away. It is May 25th, 2011. Two sisters walk to a bus stop on the island of Saipan in the Northern Mariana Islands. The stop is 100 meters from their home. They sit down and wait. They are never seen again. Faloma Luhk was 10 years old. Her sister Maleina was 9. They had grown up in the small village of Astio, raised by their grandparents after both parents left the islands for work, their father to Micronesia, their mother eventually to the mainland United States. The girls were close, well-liked at school, comfortable in their neighborhood. The bus stop was practically in their front yard. This was not a journey with any obvious risk. The school bus came. The driver did not specifically remember whether the girls boarded. The children still on the bus when their grandparents flagged it down were clear. Faloma and Maleina had not been on it. They had never gotten on. A search of the surrounding area found nothing. Investigators went door to door. The case drew attention in the local community and eventually among people who follow missing persons cases internationally. 2 children vanishing from a bus stop, visible from their own home, is the kind of thing that does not have easy explanations. A suspect was identified. He was a local man with prior convictions for crimes against children. He was interviewed. He was released. The evidence against him was described as circumstantial. He was never charged. A second person of interest was also identified and similarly cleared, at least in terms of formal proceedings. The Northern Mariana Islands is a small territory. Astio is a small village. The bus stop is still there. A small pavilion, the same one, 100 meters from the house where the girls lived with their grandparents. Someone in that community knows what happened after the school bus drove past. The alternative, that 2 children vanished in a rural neighborhood in daylight with no witness and no physical evidence at all, requires a kind of luck that does not exist in the real world. Faloma and Maleina Luhk have never been found. Their case remains open. Their grandparents waited for them to come home from school on a May afternoon, and are still waiting. She was never named. For 24 years she lay in a hospital bed in Vitória, Brazil, and the world continued without her, and no one came to say who she was. June 12th, 2000. Valentine's Day in Brazil. Downtown Vitória, capital of the state of Espírito Santo. Witnesses saw a young woman being followed by a man. During the pursuit, she was struck by a vehicle on a busy avenue. The driver did not stop. She was taken by ambulance to a public hospital in critical condition, carrying no identification. She had no documents. No one at the hospital recognized her. She underwent surgery. She did not wake up. She was placed in a coma ward and remained there. The hospital noted 2 things about her that might have led somewhere. She appeared to be between 18 and 21 years old. She had a caesarean section scar, which meant, almost certainly, that she had at least one child. Somewhere, a child had a mother who had gone out one morning and not come back. Fingerprinting was attempted early on. It failed. Over time, as she lay unmoving, her fingerprints wore down completely, too smooth to read. No photograph of her was taken at the scene, before the surgeries, when her appearance was intact. The window for easy identification closed and did not reopen. She was transferred, a year later, to the Hospital da Polícia Militar. A doctor there took on her care and kept it for 15 years. He was the one who gave her the name Clarinha, Little Clara, because of her fair skin. He retired in 2016. He kept visiting anyway. He hoped that one day the file on his desk would say her name. On March 14, 2024, Clarinha died of a respiratory complication. She had been in a coma for 24 years. She died unidentified. Her body waited in the hospital while new DNA samples were collected. She was eventually buried in a marked grave. Somewhere there is a person, perhaps a grown child, perhaps a sibling, perhaps a parent who has spent 24 years wondering, who does not know that she was alive all that time, who does not know she had a name that someone gave her out of kindness. The doctor still visits the grave. That part is documented. That is the last thing the case gave anyone. A phone booth. A park in Innsbruck, Austria, at 5 in the morning, 2 days before her 20th birthday. On the night of June 22, 2005, Daniela Kammerer left an end-of-semester party with her bicycle. She was 19 years old, a business student, in good spirits. She had her whole summer ahead of her. Her dormitory was a straightforward ride from the party, in one direction. The phone booth in Rapoldi Park was in the opposite direction entirely. Nobody knows why she cycled toward the park. At 5 in the morning, her body was found near the phone booth. She had been stabbed twice, once in the heart, once in the lung. Her bicycle was nearby, unlocked. You do not leave your bicycle unlocked voluntarily in the middle of the night. The unlocked bicycle means she did not intend to stop. Something, or someone, stopped her. A witness reported hearing a man and a woman arguing near the phone booth shortly before the body was discovered. The man spoke German. That witness is the closest thing to an eyewitness this case has ever had, and the lead went nowhere. 246 people were interviewed in the investigation that followed. Daniela's friends, her classmates, the people at the party, people who lived near the park, people who had no obvious connection to her at all. No arrest was made. 8 years later, on Christmas Day 2013, Austrian police made a dramatic move. A former classmate of Daniela's, a man who had since moved to Australia, was arrested at Vienna airport as he arrived in the country. DNA traces connected to him had been found on her clothing. The arrest was widely covered. Within weeks, he was released. The evidence was not sufficient to prosecute. He was never charged. He was later compensated by the Austrian state for wrongful detention. As of 2025, the investigation remains open. New DNA analysis techniques are being applied to the physical evidence. Her killer celebrated her 20th birthday without her, and every birthday since, and has never been publicly identified. Daniela Kammerer would be 40 years old this year. Her case is the kind that stays with people who live nearby. A murder in a park in a safe city. A bicycle left unlocked. and a man whose voice a witness heard arguing in the dark and could not identify.
She said, "I'm gone, Mama." Her mother said, "Okay," and went back to sleep.
It was early morning. Tonetta was heading to school. Those were the last words they exchanged. Tonetta Yvette Carlisle was 15 years old, a freshman at Chattanooga High School in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The morning of March 16, 1989, she slipped out early, trying not to wake her mother Noni, who worked a hotel maid's shift and needed rest. Tonetta said her goodbye at the door and walked towards school. At 2:55 in the afternoon, she was seen leaving the school building. The walk home was short. She lived in the 600 block of Hamilton Avenue. She turned toward it. 5 minutes later, at 3 p.m., a woman standing on Ruth Street looked up the hill and saw Tonetta walking along the road, about half a block from her house, and then watched as a tan and yellow vehicle, sometimes described as a van, pulled up and multiple people jumped out and grabbed her. They dragged Tonetta inside the vehicle and drove away at speed. The witness and her husband got into their own car and chased the van. They obtained the license plate number, LKH 920. They called the police. The plate led to the van. The van led somewhere. And then the trail stopped. No arrest was ever made. No body was ever recovered. The case, despite having a documented abduction witnessed in broad daylight, a license plate number called in within minutes, and a clear trajectory on a residential street, did not result in a prosecution. Tonetta's family has maintained hope for decades, and the case has been periodically revisited by investigators. It appeared in local Chattanooga coverage on the 30th anniversary of her disappearance in 2019. The family was still asking for information, still describing her as a girl who said goodbye at the door and never came back. The van was found. The license plate was real. Somewhere between that van and an arrest, something failed. Something in the investigation, something in the evidence, something that was available in 1989 and is harder to reconstruct now. Tonetta would be 50 years old. Her mother still lives in Chattanooga. The last thing her daughter said to her was, "I'm gone, Mama," a phrase that meant nothing at the time and has meant everything since.